This webinar is hosted by the Global Action Partnership for Extended Producer Responsibility, the GAP for EPR. However, please note that the views and opinions of the experts expressed in the webinar do not necessarily reflect the positions of all core partners of the GAP for EPR, nor of Prevent Waste Alliance members or official policy positions of the international organizations and governments involved. So let's have a look on the agenda so you know what to expect today. First of all, Andrew Brown from OECD will be setting the scene and give a short introduction and the concept of EPR, also present a gap for EPR shortly, and then also dive into the construction sector a little bit. Then Lisa Graaf from BPIE will present the discussion paper, Extended Producer Responsibility in the Construction Sector, Exploring the Potential. And then we will have a panel discussion followed by questions and answers. And I'm very happy to announce this very rich of expertise, this panel, with Mohammed from UNEP, Jérôme from Valobat, Jonna Byskata from Kingspan Group, and also Dr. Dirk Schwede from the Technical University of Applied Sciences in Lübeck, Germany. And after that, like I mentioned, we will have some time for your questions and also for discussing a bit. So looking forward to this agenda with you all today. And I'm happy now to introduce our first speaker, Andrew Brown. He's a junior environmental policy analyst at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. And he is a young leader in resource and environmental policy who has been working for 13 years on issues of resource productivity and waste management, with a strong focus on resource efficiency and the circular economy. So very warm welcome to you, Andrew, and handing over to you.
All right, thank you very much for the introduction, Angelina. So I'm just now taking control of the presentation. So yes, my name is Andrew Brown. I work for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, in particular in our Environment Directorate, where we have a team of analysts who work specifically on circular economy. And I'm from the United States, but we're based in Paris, France. Let's see. To the next slide. All right, so today I'm going to be speaking about some of our recent research, but I want to just highlight that the organization I work for, the OECD, has been involved in looking at extended producer responsibility at the forefront of the available material and research on this topic for over 30 years. Some recent publications that we've been involved in were in 2016, we produced a guidance manual for this was an update of an earlier edition, a guidance manual on using extended producer responsibility. I'll also be drawing from some more recent material today in my discussion around new aspects of extended producer responsibility, which was a work that was published at the end of 2023, which was looking at some of the material, such as construction materials. And most recently in 2024, just before the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastics met in 2024, we put out a paper which is looking at sort of a 10-page range, which sort of distills the best available information about extended producer responsibility. We've called this Basic Facts and Key Principles about the topic area. I also want to introduce the Global Action Partnership for Extended Producer Responsibility. We may have some folks who have joined the call today where this might be a new information for them. So I just want to share that this is something that is a partnership of a few different organizations which are involved in this topic area. And we're working together to think jointly about extended producer responsibility, want to connect practitioners of this, both at things such as producer responsibility organizations, as well as government officials and research academics, so experts worldwide, hoping to foster collaboration between these individuals and to support innovative thinking about extended producer responsibility. So thank you for joining this webinar hosted by the GAP. I just want to make sure that everyone on the call is aware of what we mean by extended producer responsibility. And for this, we take the definition from our 2024 publication, which is that it's a policy approach which makes producers responsible for their products along the life cycle, including at the post-consumer stage. So frequently, this is a schematic of what this looks like, especially in the packaging product sector, where there's usually something like a take-back obligation or a recycling target, which is put onto a product sector by the governments. This affects producers who then exchange with one another, frequently in something called a producer responsibility organization, which brings together collaborative effort to implement the obligations for an EPR. But it's also something EPR involves not just producers. It's not a delegation of authority entirely to producers and producer responsibility organizations. Governments are involved in setting targets as well. They often are housing the data and collaborating this. It also involves municipalities, which are often at the forefront of implementing collection and recovery of materials. And it can, especially with regards to the money flows, you can see here in data, it brings together these various actors and fosters a collaborative working environment between them. So extended producer responsibility has been subject to some justifications and positive reinforcement for this policy approach. There's also been some criticisms over the last few decades that this idea has existed. In terms of justifications, often frequently cited has been that this is an opportunity to recover the costs of implementing public ambition for collection and recovery of materials. It helps with separate collection and the recovery. As well, there's a hypothetical idea around this idea that by making producers responsible for this material, that it would incentivize design for the environment. Now, there has been some indication that this has occurred around the ideas of things like lightweighting products, whereby if implementing EPR collectively, oftentimes fees are set by tonnage or by product. So there's some incentive to reduce the weight of a product, and this has been played out in time. But in terms of the genuine hopes for changing entire designs or business models, this remains mostly a hypothetical justification, which leads nicely into the discussion of the criticisms of extended producer responsibility, especially from academia. There's been an argument that there's little evidence of the original hopes for this design change. Industry has cited additional costs of implementing EPR, and some municipalities have bemoaned a loss of control when giving over to the producers themselves for implementation of the take-back requirement or for recovery targets. Our 2024 paper does a nice job of condensing a lot of the experience over 3 decades with extended producer responsibility across a few different themes. It draws upon a large basis for different material sources that have been widely reviewed by experts, including material by the OECD, the United Nations agencies such as the Environment Program, as well as the European Union with their Waste Framework Directive and its description of an extended producer responsibility scheme, the World Wildlife Fund, and the Prevent Waste Alliance. It covers topics ranging from how to set a clear definition for responsibility through to how to ensuring fair competition. So it's a nice resource. If you have not downloaded it, I encourage you to do so. I also want to just briefly give a bit more of a description as to how we came to talk about EPR and how this became something that we've become interested in as policymakers. So really the precursors of this idea of extended producer responsibility dates with the deposit refund systems that came about in the 1970s in North America and in particular in the United States of America. This then became more widely encouraged across in academics who provided the theoretical framework for extended producer responsibility in the 1990s. This was then first introduced mostly in the packaging product sector, which was then followed by some directives at the European Union level for the member states, which drove implementation on the y-axis in terms of batteries, electronic equipment, and vehicles, end-of-life vehicles, has led to a widespread introduction of these programs since roughly between 2000 and 2013. And some of the successes has led to a discussion as to where could we possibly apply EPR to additional product sectors, including construction, which we're talking about today. The justification for this is around additional products. There's public ambition for separate collection of these large waste streams. So a study that was done in 2020 tried to put a weight to the amount of living organisms on the planet Earth just now. And when we compare this to the built environment, it sort of indicates that we're either at a tipping point or we've already crossed a tipping point whereby the built environment exceeds in just pure weight living organisms. So this indicates how much of a waste stream we're talking about in the construction sector. As well, there's more of a desire across governments and the public itself for mitigating pollution and for implementing these incentives for design for the environment. This is what our paper in 2023 was looking at, with some of these aspects of how to bring these into an extended producer responsibility system. And in particular for construction, we're going to hear a lot more, especially in the next presentation by Lisa, but I just wanted to flag some of the things that we found in our research. We found sort of three archetypes for these EPR schemes in construction. There were around unused products, and in particular, there's quite an extensive experience with paint in the United States of America around something called the Paint Care Program, which is recovering material that has not been used, but the consumer no longer wants this. There's been examples of used materials at brownfield construction sites. This is where the material has been used for a number of years and collecting this and reusing it in a new application. An example is around the flat glass system in the Netherlands. And there's also construction and demolition recovery targets in the United States of America. There's also an appetite or some developing ideas around an EPR system for recouping the costs of managing illegal dumping. And in particular, France has been leading on looking at this as a possibility for dealing with the costs of managing illegal dumping of the construction sector. Some challenges that we came across were around defining a producer. Typically with, for example, the packaging sector, it's around the producer is typically the manufacturer. There's a question in the construction sector. If it's a brownfield site, should it be the new constructor? Should it be the original producer? Is it the manufacturer of the material itself? There's also issues when we talk about pollution or littering around methodologies. If you take the same litter survey twice, you may get different results. So there's noise in the results. There's also a possibility to incentivize an engagement in how these processes are determined. And one of the themes of our paper was to ask the question, what is EPR doing? Is it helping to add something beyond just a form of recouping the costs for public ambition, or can we engage producers in changing behavior through the EPR system? Are they adding value beyond simply revenue generation? So with that, I want to share these links when the slides are shared later, and I encourage you to download them and to contact if you have any questions. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for this nice introduction to the topic of EPR, but also already introducing the topic of EPR in the construction sector, and highlighting again how relevant the sector is for sustainability, and also pointing out already some challenges. I'm sure we will come back to those in the panel discussion at latest. And please feel free also to share the link in the chat if you like, or maybe we could assist here later on. Thank you, Andrew. Great. Then I'm happy to introduce our next speaker. And like Andrew said, Lisa will speak a bit more about EPR in the construction sector. Lisa Graaf is a political scientist with a focus on environmental and resource policy. She has advised the German Ministry of the Environment on resource policy in various projects. And in this context, she has also dealt with EPR in several product areas. And also with Prevent, Lisa has a short history, I would say. She led a pilot project project on awareness raising on EPR for we in Ecuador. And for 2.5 years, Lisa has been working at BPIE, a European think tank based in Brussels and Berlin. And BPIE's mission is a climate neutral and socially just building stock. And accordingly, she has been looking into the importance of EPR in this sector. Very glad to have you as speaker, Lisa. And yeah, handing over to you.
Thank you, Angelina, and to all in the Global Action Partnership to organize this webinar and for the kind introduction. I'm really thankful for the opportunity to present our discussion paper, which we published this June. And I had prepared a slide on BPIE, which I will skip now due to time and because it has been said already. Maybe I can just add that the way we work is we always also engage with stakeholders. So the discussion paper builds on the exchange and the insights we had also with industry representatives, so including Jonna and Jérôme, who will be on the panel today, and people from the Commission in Brussels in April this year. What I would like to talk about today, and I have only 15 minutes, is the following. So explain a bit why we started looking at the construction sector, EPR for construction, and then give a brief overview of some of the examples of EPR schemes in the construction sector with the European focus, I should add, and then lastly summarize what we've learned. And maybe just one more sentence. In our discussion paper, we also explain a bit better the general principles of EPR, what is a producer responsibility organization, and so on. So it has been explained now, I think, by Andrew nicely, so I will skip this part. But for those of you who are maybe less familiar with EPR, you'll find this also in our paper. So some facts, many of you will be familiar with them, and Angelina and Andrew have both pointed out the relevance of the construction sector in their introduction. Again, we have the European perspective, so the European figures here. I guess this can be very well then complemented by Mona and also Dirk from the international perspective they have. But fact is, the European construction industry requires vast amounts of resources and material. It accounts for about 50% of all extracted materials, and based on the volume, it's the largest waste stream. So 1/3 of all waste is construction demolition waste. Then we have this recovery target of 70%, which sounds quite good, but this high figure does not automatically correspond to high value recycling. It's rather poor levels of circularity, so much is being backfilled and downcycled. So given that we live in a world with limited resources, this means we need to change how we interact with materials so that we use them for as long as possible and waste as little as possible and turn items, that currently end up as waste into valuable inputs to new products. And then we also know that circular material flows, they have other benefits beyond resource savings. It helps to avoid supply chain insecurities. It often goes hand in hand with reducing emissions. So this is why policymakers are increasingly putting the spotlight on circularity. And in Europe, I won't go into all those files listed here, but we have the Circular Economy Action Plan, and in there, the construction sector has been identified as one of the key topics for the transition to a circular and sustainable economy. We have the Waste Framework Directive with a recovery target, which is also currently being revised. Ursula von der Leyen, the new and old Commission President, announced an EU Circularity Act. So the topic is still very much on the agenda. And also, it was mentioned already, EPR in the Green Deal is mentioned as a very important mechanism to increase resource efficiency and circular product design. So what role can EPR play? Andrew has also mentioned the expansion of EPR to other product groups, which we see happening in the European Union. In July, it was expanded to textiles in the circular textile strategy. So the question for us, it's here with a question mark, but EPR also as a means to contribute to circular economy in the construction sector. Well, and so from the viewpoint of what we know about the need to transform the sector into more sustainable, more circular sector, I've listed here a couple of, what we need. And one thing is we need better knowledge of secondary material flows to find the best solutions to use the materials. If we want to save resources and emissions, we know the higher up the waste hierarchy, the better. So for example, reuse of materials and components is really important. And there are startups working on that, making reused materials available on digital platforms. So we need a better local infrastructure to collect and store those materials. We need to become better in selective demolition, and we need more sustainable, more circular product put on the market. So for us, it was a bit, you know, the idea or the question, is much of this something an EPR can tackle or support with? And Andrew mentioned in his input the 3 archetypes of EPR in construction. We have a bit of a different categorization, but I think that's not a problem. So we have it more regarding the regulatory approach and the materials they cover. So especially the scope in the last column. And France and the Netherlands are both collective schemes where the producer collectively organize to comply with their tasks and transfer the responsibility to the producer responsibility organization. They differ a bit in regulatory approach. I get to that. One is more like government-led, you can say. The other is more industry-driven. And then maybe most obvious, the scope is different. While France tackles all materials, the Netherlands is a one product focus. So let's start with the Netherlands case. As I said, it's an EPR scheme applied to only one product group, so flat insulation glass. And some companies had started a voluntary system in 2002 with the aim to increase the separate collection and the recycling rates of flat glass waste, because to reduce the use of primary raw materials and energy consumption and CO2 emissions from the glass manufacturing, the industry is very interested in closing the loop. So really implement a closed loop system for flat glass. But with this voluntary system, huge amounts still disappeared into other streams of construction demolition waste. And also it was voluntary. So some producers bore the cost and others did not. So to make all producers responsible and have them pay the fair share to the waste collection system, the Association of Product Flat Glass requested the ministry to establish a generally binding agreement to make it mandatory. So this was not the government taking action, but rather really industry driven, as I said, and such binding agreement can only be implemented if there is broad industry support. So I think it's 75% of the total numbers of firms that need to support it, and also 75% of the market share. And while this was achieved, so therefore the general binding agreement was passed and the mandatory EPR applies since January 2023 onwards. And it's effective for 5 years and can then be renewed. So what does it contain? As in every EPR, producers are obliged to pay a fee for the product placed on the market to contribute to the waste management. In the Netherlands scheme, this is 30 cents per square meter of flat glass sold in the Netherlands, and the funds are collected by the PRO, which then operates the waste treatment structure and also coordinates the partners also participating in this. They manage a network of over 2,000 collection points for flat glass, and there's also this maximum radius for the collection points. And currently 90% of the flat glass is collected by either the VRN, the PRO, the main PRO, or other parties. And then it's not on the slide, but also, of course, there is this function of a PRO for communication and awareness raising to promote the collection of the remaining 10% unseparate flat glass. So the Netherlands case is quite end-of-life oriented, very basic principle of EPR, make producers pay for the management of the end of life of their product, improve the recycling infrastructure, and then to increase the collection rates. Now, France is a bit different. France implemented the extended producer responsibility on construction and demolition waste in 2023, and we have this broad scope here, so covering all construction materials. And one of the main reasons, and Jérôme can maybe talk about this later, was the need to reduce littering and illegal dumping, as was said also by Andrew. It was very expensive, and at the same time, the landfill capacity was reducing drastically. Therefore, the EPR regulation was implemented. So producers, in this case, including manufacturers, importers, distributors, are required to pay a fee. In France, this was called eco-contribution per unit of product placed on the market. And then the producer responsibility organization, which in the France scheme is called eco-organization, collects the fee, manages the materials. And there are currently 4 PROs in France. Valobat is one of them. And Valobat is also the only one that handles all categories of waste under the scheme, because the French EPR covers 2 categories of waste. So one is the inert waste, concrete, bricks, soil, stones, and so on. And then the other category contains, let's say, the other products, metal, wood, plaster, glass wool, and so on. So I have one slide here on the collection targets. You see the PROs have both collection and recycling targets, which are set out in the EPR regulation for different waste categories. So again, inert and then non-inert, 2 categories. And you see that the colors below specify targets for collection, for recovery, for recycling, and then reuse. And then you have recycling targets for specific waste categories, so specified for 2024 and 2027. Regarding the recycling infrastructure for construction demolition waste, the law requires to establish 2,400 collection points by the end of 2023. The maximum distance is also defined, so 10 kilometers in urban areas and 20 in rural areas. And Valobat, I received the latest figures of September 2024, has established already more than 3,000 collection sites. And then also very interesting is to incentivize waste sorting. A free take-back service is provided. So if you're a company and you hold construction demolition waste and you have it sorted, you can save on the landfill tax and the transportation costs. And this service is gradually implemented. Then also on upstream innovation, we heard this is a bit questioned, the upstream innovation potential. The French, the EPR law includes the introduction of a bonus-malus system, which the EPR experts know as the eco-modulation of fee. And it means that based on the environmental performance of products placed on the market, you either pay less or you pay more if your product is less sustainable. And the PROs in France, they have commands developing criteria in 2024 to introduce this eco-modulation of fee. I learned it's also a complex task, so also an ongoing discussion. Maybe we can also hear about it in the panel later. And then lastly, the PRO are also required to inform and raise awareness on the correct sorting and handling of construction and demolition waste, and also invest in research and development. Now, I have one more slide, and I don't want to go into detail too much here, just to say that we also increasingly see in the sector that producers of construction material implement individual EPR schemes. So they maintain ownership of the resource and comply with companies' sustainability goals. Here are some examples listed. It's not a complete list. In all these schemes, the manufacturer, they promise to reprocess the product and put it to second use. But most of the schemes relate to the future. And what I mean by that is that it's applied to products that are sold now, and the promise is to take those back in a couple of years or 20 years or whenever it will be, but not to products that have been placed on the market years ago, so the legacy waste and EPR language. So what do we learn from the examples? We have the differences in scope and regulatory setup. This depends very much on the national context and the challenge each country, or also the industry of a country, faces. In the Netherlands, we have the landfill ban that has been in effect since, I think, the late 1990s. So recycling practices are very well established, and the focus was on addressing specific issues related to flat glass. And in France, we had a different driver, so the landfill capacity and also the recognition that, you know, we need to drive circularity. So that's a much broader scope. Then we have more this government-led versus the industry-led scheme. And regarding the contribution to higher recycling rates and scale-up of circular business models, we have to acknowledge it's still early, especially the French case, quite new, but we see this very impressive rollout of collection infrastructure and the free take-back service for sorted material, which then also contributes to higher value recycling and the stimulation of a market for secondary solutions. Then we have this communication and capacity channels. So through the PRO, you can target building owners, demolition companies, and Valobat is also doing, for example, capacity building on selective demolition. Then compared to the individual schemes, so the collective EPR scheme they seem much better suited to manage the legacy waste because of what I just said. The individual schemes promise to take the product sold now back and put them back to use, but what to do with the material manufactured and installed a long time ago. And then the innovation or the upstream potential, also what I mentioned that France has included that in the regulation and also others are developing it. And the need to combine EPR with other policies. This is, I think, not new. The combination of EPR with landfill bans, for example, or to create and demand also the combination with green public procurement seems very, very relevant. So this is the last slide. I don't know my time. I hope it's okay. So we wrote this discussion paper from the European perspective. Today we're talking also with international experts, but we strongly believe and put it forward in the paper that it deserves further examination. So EPR for construction, really understand a bit better the critical issues and solve them together. So I've listed a couple of issues here, the appropriate scope, the definition of recycling, so open or closed loop recycling. Yeah, I think we get to this in the panel, so I don't need to read the issues here now. And we think it would be extremely useful, given that there are many policy developments, such as also whole life carbon disclosure requirements in the EPBD or taxonomy, the recycling content criteria, to really bridge the gap between the different stakeholder communities and yeah, discuss together. So I think with this, I would end here. And yeah, very happy to have this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for this nice introduction or overview of your study, and also showing us the two cases with France and Netherlands, and yeah, already showing that there are so many differences already in these two systems. Thank you for that. Just trying to take back control of the slides. Great. We're still in time. We have now like 1 or 2 minutes if there is a pressing question towards Lisa or Andrew, not like a discussion question. We have time for that later on, but rather if something was unclear or yeah, just the need to clarify a point that was mentioned. I see that Piotr has already put some questions in the chat. Thank you for that. I think these questions are rather to be discussed and not just like clarifying questions. So I would pick them up later on. But if there's anything that needs to be clarified on at this point, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. Otherwise, of course, you can still put it in the chat, and I think Lisa and Andrew could also answer in the chat. So yeah, thank you to both of you again. That was a very nice and comprehensive introduction. Yeah, there's one question now in the chat: how can EPR be implemented for construction materials with a longer lifespan, like concrete? So I think that's exactly the question we will discuss now in the panel discussion. So thank you for raising that question. And yeah, and I'm really happy to present to you all of our experts. I'm very glad that Jérôme Dassini, Director of Public Affairs at Valobat, the French PRO dedicated to products and materials for the construction sector in France, is with us on the panel. Jérôme joined Valobat in November 2021 to help to launch this PRO actually, and previously he has implemented a selective collection of household packaging in France and worked for the French Agency for Ecological Transition. So welcome to you, Jérôme. Then also glad to welcome Jonna Byskata. She's head of EU Public Affairs at the Kingspan Group, which is a construction product manufacturer for applications. And I just checked the website, so applications for the roof, for the wall, for the floor, and kind of everything, if I'm not mistaken. And Jonna has been specializing in EU policy and environmental energy regulation since over 25 years. She has been following EU construction policy for over 15 years. And Jonna has worked for Kingspan since 4 years already now. And Kingspan, yeah, like I mentioned, makes construction materials and has a presence in most EU countries. So also warm welcome to you, Jonna. Then we welcome also our third panelist, Mohammed. She's Program Management Officer of the Life Cycle Initiative hosted by the United Nations Environment Programme. Mona works on increasing access to life cycle analysis data, life cycle knowledge, and harmonized methodology for public and private stakeholders to implement sustainable consumption and production strategies. And in her role, she works closely with the building and construction sector, but also the mining and extractivities, high impact sectors. And Mona also co-leads the Building Materials Hub, which is a collaboration between One Planet Network, the Life Cycle Initiative, and the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. And the hub has different working groups, for example, on circularity and also whole life cycle. So very warm welcome to you, Mona. And last but not least, I'm happy to welcome also Dr. Dirk Schwede. He's Professor for Energy and Building Services at the Technical University of Applied Sciences in Lübeck and is working on large research projects on sustainable and energy efficient buildings in Vietnam and also Cambodia. He's also working as an energy expert in Germany and as a consultant in international projects. And his research is focused on sustainable development in the Asian context and climate through architectural and engineering measures in the built environment, as well as on adapted sustainable building approaches for developing and also emerging countries. And he is furthermore of the Independent Expert Commission that is advising the German Environment Agency. So a very, very warm welcome to the four of you. I stopped sharing my screen now because of course we want to see you. Yeah, great. And to dive into the discussion, maybe starting again at a bit of at a conceptual approach. So maybe looking at you, Dirk, from a conceptual perspective, in your opinion, what are the differences to other waste streams and what are the challenges connected to it?
Yeah, I think it was said partly already in the construction sector. We have very long life cycles for some of the materials, but we have also, of course, waste streams which have shorter life cycles, like the interior fit out and so on. And perhaps what is also special, we have materials which are, let's say, not so valuable. We have also materials which are very valuable in the building services system, for example. A lot of metal, a lot of things which can be recycled, which are also valuable to the producers. I think then one problem I perceive as well is that we have many actors which handle materials, which process materials on the site. So perhaps if a material is used, then it changes its form and its function and so on. And so afterwards, perhaps no one wants to be responsible for something someone else has handled. And I think these are the challenges we have to define and have to deal with when we talk about producers' responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Thank you for that. So a lot of challenges, differences also to other material streams. Jérôme, as Valobat or also in France, France decided to introduce a EPR system for the construction sector anyways, despite these challenges. Maybe you could expand a little bit, what was the political motivation to introduce EPR in France?
Yes, thank you for the invitation. As you may know, the French anti-waste law for the circular economy was passed in 2020. As Andrew said, It increased the number of the sector converted by EPR. More than 20 economic sectors are now involved with the EPR, from household packaging to electrical and electronic waste, even cigarette butts and construction. The Act also expanded the scope of the EPR. Historically, only waste management was involved, and the law sets out objectives for waste prevention, reuse, or eco-design for product and materials. So liability applies to the entire product's life cycle. And in the construction sector, the Parliament had two political objectives. The fight against illegal deposition, dumping in nature, in cities, in forests, outside any facility capable of receiving waste properly. As you may know, during the Parliament session, a mayor of a small town in the south of France was hit by a truck and killed while making a deposit. And the emotion in the country was very, very great. The second objective is more positive, since it is to promote recycling and reuse of material. In other words, we need to feed our industry with secondary raw materials. And this is the two main objectives: fight against illegal dumping, and then to feed our industry with secondary raw materials.
Great, thank you for sharing this motivation, and I guess it's also shared by other governments in Europe. We've heard that Valobat is operating only since a few years now, but maybe you could already share some first experiences that were made until today as a PRO. That would be interesting as well.
Okay, yes. As you said, it started last May 2023, so it's a small experience. But as you know, building products may contribute through an eco-contribution, a fee, and more 8,000 companies have already chosen PROs, and Valobat represents 55% of these companies. Most of them are manufacturers, most of them are small accounts, and three main products are represented: joinery, metal, and plastic, but other sectors are also considered as plaster, for example. As Lisa said, we have the obligation to implement three free recovery channels: collection sites, and there are three kinds of them: retailer, and 1,300 distributors have already the services for that. Secondly, there are 260 private collection sites, and we have already public collection sites, less than 1,600 public collection sites. The second channel is important. It's the warehouse of craftsmen or construction companies, and we have already served 340 warehouses. And the last, but the most important channel are directly on construction sites when the construction's waste exceed 50 square meters of waste. And by the end of the year, there will be 5,000 construction sites already delivered with the service. So for each of these channels, the service is now in place, and it works. It collects waste. So we are very proud of that. And for retailer, for distributor, it was really a revolution. They changed one part of their job, selling products and material, and then collecting materials and waste.
Thank you so much, Jérôme, for these insights. And yeah, congrats to hear that it already works out, at least for the collection side. I think there are already some questions regarding more upstream in the chat, but I think we'll come back to that later. Thank you. Maybe moving to you, Jonna. You're representing Kingspan today, and as a manufacturer, where do you see the benefits of the EPR system in France?
Yes, indeed. Thanks for the good conversation here. And we are, as Kingspan, shareholder in Valobat, so we are involved there. It certainly has started with the bang, let's say, with lots of activity and the growth of the collection system. So I think as benefits for manufacturers, there are many. First of all, it really focuses us on finding secondary materials for our product and end-of-life solutions for our product. And so that is something that really for us has really kind of started in France. Now we want to do a lot of projects, and of course it's collective too. So within Valobat, for example, there are R&D programs where the companies together in finding better ways to separate and sort. There were some questions about selective demolition systems, for example. I think those things are important to develop further, and that's done very well collectively together. And I think one of the large benefits is that this collection system, which is going to collect all that construction material in France, of course, kind of with the growth curve, it will allow, first of all, better sorting at the construction sites. Like Jérôme said, there's a real focus to go into construction sites and sort of sort the waste and collect everything. And then secondly, since the volumes go up, there will be a lot more secondary material available. And I think that is something which is important going forward. There will be a lack of resources, a lack of virgin materials, and a need to really start finding good solutions for secondary use. And I think that's where the French system, I think, will come up with a lot of innovative ideas, both at company level and, of course, at kind of collecting level. So I think that's great. The Valobat R&D program starting now for the first time, and then there will be a growing number of programs there. I think another.
Sorry, Jonna, to interrupt. There is a bit of a technical issue regarding the sound. Okay. I'm not sure if you're well connected to the Wi-Fi, or maybe sometimes it helps also to turn off the video, even though it would be unfortunate not to see you.
Can you hear me though?
Yeah, no, it's better, I think.
Okay, I will turn on the video. I hope it's better now.
Not sure. I don't think so. Maybe we could come back to you in a second, if that's okay. Sorry for that. But I can quickly summarize what I understood from your intervention. So as manufacturers, I think it's really important to have access to secondary materials. And of course, since with the French EPR system, all construction materials will be collected. First of all, this will offer the chance for better sourcing already at source, so to say, at the construction sites, and then also have better chances to create more secondary resources. And furthermore, I understood that there's also research and development programs on a separation, for example, with Valobat. So I think this also helps for the manufacturers. I hope I captured that right.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now it's way better. Yeah, great.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just turned my phone off the Wi-Fi, and maybe that helped. So yeah, you did say right, and I just wanted to say one other point, if you can hear me now, on the more upstream point, because within The French EPR also sets this sort of that the eco-contribution fees that we pay for putting the material on the market is differentiated by how circular the material is assessed to be. And this assessment is done within the PRO, like within Valobat. And I think that's a great, that kind of engages industry and companies together to agree on how do you assess circularity, and then we know kind of what to focus on. Of course, let's focus on recycled content, but we are also together discussing what makes a product less recyclable. For example, I think those are very important developments going forward as in the design and development of the future construction. I think that the French EPR will come up with a lot of innovation and solutions. That's why we think that it's great for us manufacturers to be very actively engaged.
Great, thank you, Jonna. Unfortunately, the sound wasn't better. I thought in the beginning it was, but it wasn't. So maybe I'll come back to you with the second question in a moment and allow you a second to fix it, hopefully. So yeah, maybe we focus now a lot on Europe, on the French case, of course, but yeah, since we also want to see what's going on at a global level, we thought we would expand this discussion a little bit. And yeah, maybe coming to you, Mona, yeah, you're working very closely with the construction sector with projects worldwide. Maybe you could expand a little bit on what are the current efforts on global level to shift the construction sector towards more sustainability, maybe a project you would like to highlight, etc.
Yeah, but I think thank you first off for this opportunity and for the invite to be here. It's really interesting to see how EPR is being applied in the construction sector and to see the different experiences from different countries. Overall, the work that we do with the different stakeholders and partners in the global ABC when it comes to construction building materials really focuses on a whole life cycle approach, starting with first avoiding building and building with less whenever possible. So reimagining what buildings can be used for, and then to shifting towards alternative building materials, so bio-based, geo-based materials. But as we do that, of course, we look at the big picture and conduct life cycle assessments to understand the environmental impacts to make sure that we're not doing trade-offs between these different products. And then finally, we're also looking at the improvement of these hard-to-abate materials like steel and concrete. And so with this in mind, what we're really trying to encourage, and we think there's quite a lot of work within EPR as well that does that, it's really this idea of not just focusing on the waste, but really going a little bit higher up the supply stream to think about things such as design for circularity and modular designs, which really allow us to reduce the resource use. And so just for the sake of our topic today, I did a little bit of research before this session, and I was actually happy to see that there's currently a draft on EPR in India for the buildings and construction sector. And similar to France, it's really looking at the collective waste from the sector. And there are quite some limits, let's say, in terms of which projects would participate and which wouldn't, but it's really limited by area. So starting from anything of 20,000 square meters or more. So well defined that way. And then it's really looking both at the segregation and the recycling of about 100% of the generated waste, but it's growing gradually to get there by 2030. And then at the same time, they're also looking at using minimum percentages of recycled materials in new construction, starting with 5% in the upcoming couple of years and hoping to increase annually until they reach 25% in 2030. And so that was a really good example to look at outside Europe in terms of where this is happening. In EPR, the conversation around EPR has been going on quite a lot in different sectors. So for example, India itself has already quite a list of EPR rules for example, plastic packaging, battery, electric and electronic equipments, and tire base, which are all in force. But then when it comes to the buildings and construction sector and the automobiles, this is still a growing area. And while we think of EPR in the sense of circularity, and it's just the most important message from my side would be to focus on this being a downstream solution that could also enable improvement upstream, like I had mentioned earlier when it comes to modular design and etc. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mona. And thank you also for highlighting this example from India. Very interesting to see that also outside of Europe, there are movements here. And also, Sohrab Shah has already posted a link to the rules in the chat. If you scroll up a little bit, you will find the draft waste rules that will be effective as of April 2025. That's amazing. Mona, yeah, you mentioned already the opportunity or the wish you have is definitely including upstream measures in such an EPR system. Do you see some challenges also maybe in regards to EPR, but also in the construction sector or the developments at global level in general right now?
Yeah, of course, there are quite a lot of challenges that come with their own opportunities. So I think a big part of it is thinking about where all the new construction is going to be happening. And we know already that about 70% of the new stock is going to happen in Africa, for example. And so that means that we have to come up with schemes that work for different contexts. And with that in mind, informal housing sector is also quite a strong user or a strong grower, let's say, in this space. So we really have to think about how can we implement these policies so they're actually adopted at these different levels. And while we are doing that, we really have to think about the initial investments and the cost implications for this, right? So this conversation, for example, we just heard from Jérôme about the different collection facilities that they have. And depending on the sector and depending on the infrastructure in different countries, that could also include quite a lot of waste pickers that we would need to also consider in terms of the social implications of these rules. So yes, I would say these are some of the challenges and opportunities that we could look at, sorry. And then, of course, there is the question of awareness and education, and the more policymakers and the industry and users know about EPR, the more likely they are to adopt it faster and to be more willing to adopt it overall. So we see quite an opportunity for a lot of capacity building, awareness, and education in this space.
Thank you, Mona, and thanks also for highlighting this social dimension. That is, of course, very, very relevant with informal housing, but also waste pickers that should be included somehow in the sector, in the EPR system. Thank you. Dirk, you also have made some experiences in Cambodia and Vietnam. Maybe you could also report a bit of your experiences made in international projects. Where do you see the role of EPR in the global discussion, and are there other topics other than EPR in the construction sector prevailing at the moment?
Yes, of course, there are many topics which are at the moment also very important for sustainable development in the construction sectors everywhere. And one thing which is still, of course, there is energy efficient design, climate protection, how to build buildings which can be operated in an energy and efficient and sustainable way. And sometimes these objectives they demand also the introduction of new materials into markets which are, let's say, which the market players don't have so much experience with yet, and which then also, of course, there is an opportunity the value and the life cycle and the way to handle these materials afterward. This is thought already at the beginning. There have been a lot of work on aerated concrete in Vietnam, for example, that it was supposed to replace burnt bricks, for example, and that was made with the objective to save agricultural land and to save energy for the production of materials. But then, of course, aerated concrete, what do we do with aerated concrete afterwards? This is a challenge and perhaps also conflicting objectives we have here. On the other hand, I see that everywhere I'm working in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in Kazakhstan, I have a project at the moment, and everyone is talking about life cycle assessment. So to understand what happens with the materials over the life cycle, and this is a good opportunity also to think about responsibilities for the materials at the beginning and also at the end. So the topic is everywhere in the discussion, and everyone is interested in resource construction. Perhaps this topic of who is responsible is not yet there, but it's perhaps the next step which is discussed there. And then it has a lot of implications on the construction industry, of course, because someone needs to be responsible. Perhaps there needs to be someone needs to pay, someone needs to organize all this. And I'm coming from Germany. We have, of course, players like Lindner. Lindner was on the slide of Lisa before. And it's also one of the authors of our position paper. They are welcoming the materials which come back to from the buildings to their production because they need the materials and so on. But this understanding needs to develop in other places as well. I think the discussion is there. There are a lot of research projects also at the universities, at the research institutes, but the construction industry is at the moment, concerned and perhaps with also other topics. But I think it's on the way, it's coming. And if there are good examples from France, from other places, I think it will be understood and also implemented in other places. India is a good example also for other countries in the same region. So there are some front runners, and that is very good.
Thank you so much, Dirk. And yeah, it's interesting to see that you mentioned that actually the question of who is responsible and making the producers responsible is also an opportunity to address this life cycle analysis at a whole other level. So thank you for raising that. Jonna, you're back. I hope with a stable internet connection. You highlighted some of the opportunities of the French EPR system before, but I'm sure as manufacturer you also face some challenges. So maybe you would like to expand on that as well.
I hope you can hear now. I moved to my mobile phone so that...
Way better, thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. I can hear you guys perfectly, so it's unfortunate. So as I said, we see a lot of opportunity in the French scheme, both to find solutions collectively and then upstream it urges us really to to innovate on our own products. But the kind of challenges, of course, I think in such a massive scheme, it's the build-up takes its own time, and developments are found. You can't have everything immediately. It's a massive undertaking, and we have heard from not my company so much, but some other parts of the industry, also our divisions, who are expecting the solutions to come faster. So, you pay an eco contribution fee for the products, but there's no solution yet. There's no actual collection. That is something that, of course, is understandable in such a massive scheme, but that's a challenge to find the solutions quickly. I think another point which is a challenge and which we should work on together is because in the French scheme, the companies who really go to the construction sites, it's the waste management operators, those companies. So they need to kind of learn a lot now on how to sort, how to separate the different materials, and I think we need to all work together for better systems of separation. Otherwise, you have a large container and everything goes into it, and then what happens? So I think those are really challenges for everybody, and I think also a challenge is like we make many materials which are low volume, not a lot is coming out of the old buildings yet, and there are lower volumes, then there's no prioritization for those materials. So I think that's a challenge, and we realize we have to kind of get involved ourselves to find the solutions for those. So I think such a massive scheme has kind of natural challenges there, but I think also that it's a lot of opportunity to find solutions. I think another challenge for such big schemes is, traditionally there's been a lot of focus on closed loop systems for waste materials. Now I think such a scheme will show that it's you have to find regional and local solutions. You can't start driving around with lorries with some materials thousands of kilometers. France is a big country, so I think that too will focus the mind to really go for local solutions, probably use waste streams from one sector in another as a secondary material, not only within the construction waste stream, but also with other waste streams. So I think those are challenges as we see it, but opportunities as well.
Great. Thank you so much for this edition and for outlining some of the challenges. I'm very glad that we still have roughly 20 minutes left, and I see that there are already some questions in the chat. So if you have questions, please type them in the chat now or raise your hand. And I will try to pick some of them. Probably not all of them will be answered, but Jonna, you were just speaking about local solutions of probably recycling materials, but here was also the question, how about reuse of construction components to be prioritized over recycling with an EPR system? So would that also be a solution of an EPR system to always prioritize reuse over recycling?
I think definitely, and I know, and Jérôme can talk about Valobat is setting up platforms for reuse. I think this kind of scheme will exactly give good opportunities for that. Now, I think we have on a regulatory side other challenges in kind of how to adapt performance requirements and standardization to this idea of promoting reuse. But I know that we're all working on it, and the standardization process is reviewing also standards with that in mind. So yes.
Yes. Maybe can I answer this question too?
Sure, please.
Okay,
please.
great.
Yeah.
Yes, the government gave us two main objectives about recycling, of course, but about reuse too. So we launch a large action plan to develop a reuse. As Jonna said, we support a platform where you can stock the reuse material, about communication and formation for people to increase the reuse material. It's a main objective for us.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, that's good to hear. Also to see that there are upstream measures implemented. Great. Here's another question about, who is actually involved in such an EPR system? Maj is asking to what degree are demolition companies involved in the EPR schemes? For example, to what degree do they see selective demolition targets or even planning for reuse on site when demolition a building? So yeah, you mentioned already the platform you have for reuse, but are there companies furthermore involved?
To this DPR, there are many stakeholders. Of course, producer, construction companies, waste management companies, municipalities, demolition companies. It's a huge chain of value, and each part are really needed to make the EPR a success. And we face a large challenge to have all those stakeholders all together and go to get the objectives. And it's a really huge part of my job to gather all those stakeholders. But they're right. All of them have a really part of the job.
Definitely, yeah. And it can only work if everyone is on board. And
yes.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. There are more questions on the French system. Regarding fees, there are two different questions. First of all, someone is asking, could you tell us more about the amount of the EPR fee in France? And is it increasing or decreasing? What cost does it cover? And then someone else is also asking, do we have any sense of how much of the EPR fees are passed on to the consumers while the EPR fees are paid by the producers? Of course, the question is how much that cost is passed on to the price of construction products, for example. That question arises often also for packaging or textiles. So yeah, I don't know, Jérôme or Jonna, if you would like to address these questions.
Yes, I wrote a short answer. You can find the rates on our web site. But yes, it will increase for sure. There are more tones to cover. There are more channels to support. There are more tons of reuse. So it will increase. It's the beginning of something. As I said, I wrote the last figures of 23 versus 2024. It's 4 times the tons of non-inert. So you can figure that it will be increase. The second part of the question, we are asking for the visible fee of the contribution. It's possible for furniture sector, it's possible for electronic sector, but it's not possible for the construction sector, and we need it to be to be fair for all the value of the chain value.
Thank you for that. I saw that Andrew turned on his camera. I don't know if you want to add something on this point.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the second question regarding how fees are actually paid for. This is a line of research that I'm working on right now, in particular around food packaging, but some of the lessons learned are going to be somewhat applicable across product sectors. I think that yeah, there's going to be a difference between where the fee actually hits versus who actually ends up paying for it. This is similar to a tax. No matter who you tax, it may not necessarily be that that's the individual or the firm which pays it. I think that Jérôme had a very excellent point regarding visible fees. How you set up the EPR will have an impact on this. I think as well as some EPR systems, the organization which is organizing it is going to have a role in actually operating the collection and recovery, which will likely be the case in construction of something like a brownfield site. And then you have others in which maybe the municipal government is in charge of establishing a contract and is recouping the fees from the producers. In this case, I think it would be a little bit easier to transfer the costs onto a customer. But the last thing I'll point out is just when you take a look at the size of the fee as compared to the overall price for durable goods, it's usually not a very large fee compared to the price of the product itself, and especially something like a building or particular building materials in the built environment. It's unlikely to be a particularly large fee.
Thank you for this addition. Yeah, please, Jonna.
Yeah, just to say, indeed, the part of this fee from the total price of the product may not be very high yet. I presume it will go up as will the fees overall, considering in France that there's such a huge collection scheme being built up. But I think it is important. It is visible to B2B customers today. So that's important, of course, when you kind of from this year already, there is a differentiation of the fee within one product category depending on the circularity assessment. So then it will be visible to the customer, you know, that they're paying for a product which is assessed to be more circular, since the fee will be lower. So that is also important, you know, for builders and architects to have an understanding of this circularity assessment. I think Valobat is doing a good job in giving this kind of information, because I think there's a need for a lot of information for the customers, for consumers to understand how this works, that it's not just a tax, you know.
Definitely, yeah, information is key here. And yeah, I think people are also willing to pay a little bit more if they understand what it is used for. Yeah. Okay, we talked a lot about life cycle analysis, greenhouse gas emissions. There's the question if any research has been conducted or published that assesses the environmental impacts on EPR for construction materials, for example, quantification of greenhouse gas emissions. Not sure if any one of the panelists is aware of this, such a research.
So I can take a quick stab. The only paper that I see on this topic actually is Andrew Brown's publication from the OECD. But I think just overall speaking, in terms of looking at building materials and how energy intensive they are, and for example, at the comparing this with the plastics and home packaging, there's quite a lot of studies on that and what the reduced GHG emissions looked like. So I would be a bit positive, but whether or not there's actual research on this, I'd say particularly for the building sector, this is still a bit of a new area. And then Andrew, I don't know if you may have a more insight there.
Yeah, I'd be happy to point to a work that was done by Professor Reed Leifset from Yale University, where he is one of the people who has been quite vocal at the beginning of extended producer responsibility. He did a paper about 2-3 years ago at this point, I believe, that it became available, which is arguing that we should tie life cycle assessment to the modulation of fees. See that Reed has lifted his hand, so if I think he can do a better job of speaking to this than I can of his work. I think that this is something which policymakers definitely should be looking at, maybe I hand over to Reid. I think he will be better placed to answer this.
Thank you. Reid, please open the mic.
So, good morning, afternoon, and evening. I'm the person who asked about whether there's any research. I have not seen any research that examines the actual environmental outcomes in this area, and that's why I was curious. I think being pessimistic by temperament, I'm a little more pessimistic than Mona is, because a lot of construction and demolition waste is heavy and bulky. And so the transportation impacts, if it cannot be reused locally, can be substantial, reducing the potential for lowering emissions. So I'm not so sure that we can rely on the sort of general findings in the field to say that this is going to produce significant environmental improvements. I think the transportation issues are something that have to be looked at carefully.
Mm. Yeah, thanks for coming in and for raising this issue. I don't know, Mona or someone else would like to react to the statement. Yeah, Jonna, please. Or Mona, yeah, please.
Just shortly, I think just looking at the French system, it's true that now the objectives set for the system are more to do with circularity and the kind of treatment of the waste. But of course, in the eco-modulation of the eco-contribution fees, which develops every year, we look at other criteria. It would be possible to include some carbon-related criteria there for the design of new product. Now, for the actual treatment of the current all the material that's out there and collected, I think this kind of looking after the transport emissions there is going to be important, because there is a risk that obligations to treat, especially if there's some kind of closed loop type of target for the material, then there's a risk of a lot of lorries driving around.
Yeah, highlighting again the importance of local solutions as well. But I think, Mona, you wanted to react too.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say definitely in terms of this local aspect. But as we've seen quite a lot in the building sector, it is very much a local environment, local economic environment and local supply chain for the most part. So I think there is that, but at the end of the day, it also, it's not necessarily something that's going to happen by accident, but this is the type of thing that we need to be considering as we're setting the different targets for these EPR schemes.
Thanks, Mona. Anything to be added from your side, Reid?
So just a partly related follow-on question. Do any of the EPR schemes that are being put in place address the question of backfilling? For example, does the French system prohibit or aim to reduce backfilling as opposed to a higher value use? And then I'll sign off here.
Thank you for that question. Jérôme or Jonna, would you like to answer this question?
Maybe the term backfilling needs to be explained.
Reid, do you mean
Sure.
with backfilling like downcycling or?
Right. So there's a concern with some construction and demolition waste that it is used in very low value uses, downcycling, certain aspects of road construction where the primary aim is simply to use it however it can be done rather than looking at the environmental value that it produces.
Great, thanks for clarifying.
Okay, the French regulation have a very specific definition for recycling or for reuse or reutilization, for example. So the objectives are really well defined. So we can play with downcycling or stuff like that. And even for example, for wood, we have objective of energy valorization or recycling, and we have got a specific objective about recycling. So we need to respect it.
Is that also true for the inert materials?
Good question. Good question. Yes, the definition are more extended, and I'm not sure about my vocabulary about this, but yes, you can use for. No, I won't. I won't explain it because I won't be able to do it in English. I'm sorry, but your question is a good question for inert.
Thank you.
Can I say something about downcycling? I think this is something where there will be a lot of development in the next years because as we collect materials, sort them better, and there will be an increase of solutions, then I would say that the French system should find the best and most cost-effective level of using a secondary material. I would say then that the term downcycling has to be defined because just because it's not used in the same purpose or place where it was used originally doesn't mean it's a lower value per se. And sometimes maybe, especially when you think about such long life materials as construction, the original use cannot be replicated, but it can have an equally long life in another use, and that should not be a negative thing per se.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And also, Jérôme, thank you for answering some questions in the chat.
Yes, I tried
that's also
to
very
answer.
helpful.
You can find some information on our website. The rates for producer are in English, and the explanation rates are in English. And for the retailer distributor, it's in French. I'm sorry, but you will find the rates. It's easy to read, I guess.
Perfect, thank you. And luckily there are some programs that help with translations.
Okay.
Thanks. Maybe one last very quick questions towards Dirk and Mona, and because I think it's relevant also for other people here in the call. There was a question, please share, or the kind request, please share more on the informal sector involving in the construction waste in your project in Vietnam. I think this is directed towards you, Dirk, but Mona, maybe you also have some experiences in this field.
The informal sector,
exactly
you mean?
The informal sector in the construction waste sector.
Okay, in the Vietnam project, we were working with producers. We were working with in this institute at the ministry and so on. So we didn't touch the informal sector. I would say at the time. At the moment, we are doing, or the partners in Vietnam are working on rural buildings, which are a little bit more informal and so on. But I think I'm not prepared to answer that. Perhaps to connect to the previous discussion, in our position paper, we also spent a lot of time with definition of the different levels of recycling, and we thought it's very important to get the terms clear in order to be able to address the different levels and the different qualities which come out afterwards. And this is very important that we have a common definition for the discussion. Right. But the other, perhaps Mona can answer the other question, maybe.
Thanks, Dirk. And I was just going to say, I'm happy that the question doesn't specify EPR, but rather looking at construction waste overall. And so there with the informal sector, I don't have experience in Vietnam particularly, but I know there is a project from UN Habitat called Secosa. I'll just type the name Secosa in the chat that looked at construction materials and construction in the in Southern African countries, and one thing that they were looking at was the reuse of building construction materials within informal sectors, informal construction sector, particularly because as the cities were expanding, these informal settlements had to relocate quite a few number of times, and so they've become quite adapted to taking their building materials with them and then reusing them there. And I think this is a space that could definitely use a little more focus and a little more studying in terms of what those practices look like. But for now, I just encourage you to look into the work that UN Habitat is doing, particularly in their project called Sekosa.
Great. Thank you for sharing that project example. And unfortunately, we are running out of time, which also shows that I think more exchange is needed in the future between sectors, also between countries. So thank you all for joining in today. A big thank you to our panelists, Jonna, Mona, Dirk, and Jérôme. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you also, Andrew, for setting the scene and introducing into the topic. And special thanks to Lisa, who also supported me with contacting the speakers, and yeah, also for your introduction and presentation of the study. Thank you all so much. And yeah, to the audience, thanks for your questions, for participating, and I hope to see you all soon again. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.